Good evening. I'm Allen Jackson, and welcome back to Nashville. We're going to begin tonight with government waste on a grand scale. While the Doge team of Elon Musk and company is making all the headlines, there was an important hearing on Capitol Hill that didn't get the same attention. It was a hearing for a change with Democrats and Republicans, and they were in agreement that while government spending is out of control, the waste and fraudulent spending is far greater than anyone thought. The 2024 budget was $6.7 trillion. That was $1.8 trillion more than the tax revenue that came in. But as much as $1 trillion worth was fraud. So if you can stop the fraud, half of the annual deficit problem just goes away. Well, that's the situation we're in right now. But as I said at the beginning, there is a glimmer of hope. The two parties are talking, and so we're going to start talking to the man who's covered Washington for years, Doug McKelway. Welcome back, Doug.
Good to see you, Alan. Thanks for having me.
With all the reporters in Washington, they missed the big headline that there was a consensus between the two parties that the fraud in government spending is so big and so damaging that they'll need to work together to get it fixed. It's a rare and important meeting of the minds, isn't it?
It really is, and it's a wonderful thing to see for a change in the division of Washington, which is Washington these days. Whether or not the Democrats will go along with the cutting that will be necessary is a different question. But that's certainly one small sign of progress.
Well, what's different this time is that two successful businessmen are looking at the budget the same way they would look at their own company. And why are they better at it? Because fraud in the private sector is less than 3%, and fraud in government spending is 20%, which means that for every $100,000 spent by the government, $20,000 of it is fraudulent spending. Any idea why this hasn't been addressed before?
I think that there's just reticence on the part of politicians to make these difficult choices that private sector business leaders have to make virtually every day. You know, I've never wanted to be a company president because I didn't want to have to call people into my office and say, you know, I'm sorry, we're struggling right now, and we're going to have to let you go. I would hate to be that person. It's a tough choice to have to make. And I think because the government has, in effect, an unlimited supply of money, they don't have to make those kinds of decisions. We are the piggy bank. Us taxpayers are the piggy bank, and we've been giving lots of our earnings to the federal government to do what it needs to do, but that's where the waste happens. It's just not any kind of a competitive drive that would cause people to make these tough choices in government. You know, Alan, I don't think I've told you this, but my first real job after college was working for the government, or at least for one of these government contractors, what they used to call derisively beltway bandits that circled I-495 around Washington, D.C., and who thrive off of government contracts. Well, I literally looked up, I was needing a job. I'd been playing bluegrass banjo and making about $50 a week, so I said, I better get a real job. I moved back in with my parents right out of college and looked through the want ads in the Washington Post, and I found a want ad for a beltway contractor that was enlisting young people for their new contract with the federal government, with the Department of Energy, to conserve energy in the federal government under the Carter administration. It was the last year of the Carter administration during the gasoline lines and all that sort of stuff, and energy prices going up. So they were trying to conserve energy in the federal government. So I got that job, and I worked there for pretty close to a year. And you know what I did there? Nothing. I mean, I mean that literally, Alan. I did absolutely nothing. Yeah, I occasionally got coffee. I flirted with the pretty girls, but I did nothing. I can think of maybe one thing I did. I would correct reports, government reports. And I remember one in particular that I corrected, and I changed the word, we must definitize energy consumption in the federal government, to we must define energy in consumption in the federal government. I changed it because definitize is not a word. And I gave it back to my boss, and he scratched out my correction, put definitize back in. And I said, you know, that's not a word. And he goes, I know, but we like it that way here in the federal government. And then I also recall that one other thing I did was occasionally deliver manila envelopes to the Department of Energy from our offices on Capitol Hill. And I would go for a walk a quarter mile or so to the Department of Energy. And I remember walking down these long, long corridors late in the afternoon, like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I would just purposefully look in every office door as I walked down the hallway. The doors would be open. Oh, there's a person filing their nails. There's a person trimming their nails. There's a person reading the funny comics in the newspaper. There's a person reading a book. Oh, there's a person eating a banana. I would go through, hundreds of yards of corridors and see nobody working. Nobody. And somebody putting on their coat, getting ready to take the bus home because it was 5 o'clock closing hour was approaching. But it was an eye-opening experience for me that you could have legions upon legions of workers who were, for all I could see, doing nothing. At the political level, the political appointees who are appointed by presidents and the administrations, they tend to work really hard, and they filter down to the undersecretaries and their staffs. But beyond that, nothing really happens. Nothing really happens. I have a friend who works for the federal government as an editor, and for every report she writes, it has to be approved by 50 senior people. 50. You heard that right. 50 senior people. So it just goes to show how much waste there is to cut in the federal government. And I can't wait for Elon to get his hands on the Department of Defense, because what is it, 3 million people, a budget of $800 billion, probably more than 3 million people when you consider contractors and ancillary employees. So there's no shortage of waste to be cut there.
Well, President Trump and Elon Musk already have a big group of Republicans making the case for fixing the entire deficit mess, trying to make this an American issue, not a single party issue. Listen to this example.
This is not a Democrat problem. This is not a Republican problem. This is an American problem. To make it clear for everyone, not only are we $36 trillion in debt, but the compounding interest on our debt is also growing out of control. Even if we decided to defund the entire federal government, we cannot escape our debt.
And we both know this has all been tried before, but do you sense this time it may be different?
I do sense it may be different. And the key thing here is that $36 trillion debt that Marjorie Taylor Greene just mentioned. I remember when I worked at Fox News, I'm guessing this is probably about 10 years or so. I did several reports on waste in the federal government and where our tax dollars go. And I remember a barometer. This is really important. I remember a barometer of about 10 years ago, speaking to some expert, and I can't recall who it was, but I remember his words, which were, when we reach a certain level of interest rate, the debt that we pay on, the interest that we pay on the federal debt, when it reaches as much as we're paying for our defense, our national defense, that's a real danger sign. Well, it was just this year that interest on the federal debt became larger than the budget for the Defense Department. That is a real danger zone, and we have got to start reining in our federal spending. There's two ways to do it traditionally. One is to raise taxes or reduce spending. Now, Donald Trump has come up with a third idea, which is these tariffs. He hopes to make a lot of money through that. That is the tabula rasa, really. We don't know where that's going to go. If other countries fight back against that by raising more tariffs, then our costs go up, and that's trouble down the line. If it works, great for Donald Trump and great for us as Americans. We can start to get a hold of this debt. But I think the way is Donald Trump's way. I don't do tariffs along with cutting spending, but I don't think he wants to cut the defense budget. He sees that lagging right now, so it's going to be a real thorny issue for him going forward, and that chapter has yet to be written.
Well, we'll continue this conversation with Doug McKelway in just a moment. Chime in if you like by sending an email to me at comments@allenjacksonnow.com. We'll be right back. We're back now with a veteran of the ways of Washington, Doug McKelway. The House Oversight Subcommittee hearing we listened to did unearth some memorable news on the fraud and waste. Do you remember the PPP loans that went out during the COVID years? Well, a lot of fake businesses here and around the world put in loans and got approved. The Biden team was in a rush to spend, but if the check writers had simply cross-checked the people who put in for money with IRS records, they would have seen the fraudulent request. It's a simple fix that didn't happen. Doug, do you think Washington will ever learn this lesson?
Well, it's learning that lesson right now, and we're seeing the chaos that it's causing, because it's just not the typical way of doing business in Washington. We've gotten so used to through the decades. So I applaud Elon Musk for diving into this. I applaud his young employees, the people who are tech savvy, can dive into some of these computer systems, these outdated computer systems that the federal government has, understand them, find out where the money is really going, and try to rein it in. It is ruffling a lot of feathers in Washington. You know, it's amazing to me how much the city of Washington and its surrounding environments profits from the taxes we pay and the money that they spend on our behalf. I don't know what the latest figure is, but it's probably 5 or 6 of the nation's wealthiest counties are surrounding Washington, D.C. It's almost as if the federal government is a great parasite that's sucking the lifeblood out of the rest of the country and feeding off of it at. And so these cuts are going to be painful if they do in fact happen in Washington. But I do believe they need to be done. You know, and I was having a discussion on Facebook. Discussion is a nice way to put it, with a friend of mine who works for the federal government and just lost her job. And you know, I said, yeah, I understand it's tough. You know, I've worked in the private sector my whole life, and I've worked in a very unpredictable field of television news, where your future is often dependent upon ratings and you know, how many people are watching and what the company revenue is. And I've been fired lots of times. The first one was the only one that really hurt. The rest I stomached with ease. And it's not easy, you know, when you're paying a mortgage, when you're putting food on the table, and when you're putting kids through college. But I never got fired from a job where a better job did not come down the line immediately afterwards or soon thereafterwards, and that my life got better. So that would be my word to federal employees who are facing this kind of thing. Life, in all likelihood, will be better for you. So hold on. It's going to be a rocky road, but you'll survive, and you'll probably be a stronger person for it.
Well, one of the arguments that's made about how to fix this would be to come up with a government ID verification system for all government spending. I want to ask if that's possible, given that the national ID proposals always seem to get shot down by the Democrats. Do you think there's any willingness to go that far this time?
I sure hope so. I don't know what the status of that legislation is, or executive order, or even what form it's taking right now, but it seems like the way to go. We have to get a handle on this kind of stuff, because as we know from an audit of the Defense Department, they don't know where literally millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars are going. They can't account for it. So we need to start attaching the same criteria to the federal government that businesses attach day in and day out. It just has to happen. It has to become more efficient, because so much money is wasted in the federal government. And as I say, I think first and foremost among them is the Department of Defense, which is incredibly wasteful. You know, there's a situation here not far from where I live in Jacksonville, Florida, where there's several businesses that are involved in repairing literal combat ships. They're called literal combat ships. This is a ship that nobody wants. The military doesn't want them. They were from the very get-go, after they were designed and bid for and construction was underway, never worked properly. They found that hulls were cracking, that they couldn't achieve full speed, that they served no real mission. But because they don't work, there's a huge market to repair them. And a couple of local congressmen in my neck of the woods here bid to set up repair operations for these literal combat ships. So that repair work employs a lot of people, but it's a ship that nobody wants. And we see this across the defense industry, right and left, with planes that nobody wants, with ships that serve no purpose. And it's our taxpayer money that's going out there for no purpose other than to employ people. But there are better ways to employ people, and I hope people in Washington see the light of day.
Well, Doug McKelway, thank you for joining us tonight. I hope to see you in Nashville soon.
Hope so.
Well, in a moment, some thoughts about our role in all of this. I'll be right back. I'm encouraged to see some of the steps taken by this new administration to reduce government excess and reckless spending. Fraud is being exposed, waste is being exposed. Unfortunately, we've not been paying enough attention to all the foolish things that our taxpayer money was being allocated toward. While people have consistently shouted at us, told us to shut up and stay in the shadows, our government was spending billions of dollars on an ideology that opposed our worldview. You know, they say that the separation of church and state. Yet if you reviewed the expenditures of dollars by the United States in recent years, you'd be quite convinced that we had a religion, and that religion wouldn't be Christianity. Our government has been a very powerful advocate for a worldview. It's been defined by the LGBTQ plus community, by DEI, by CRT. Those are worldview issues. It's the world, with all the zeal of a tent revivalist in the South in the summertime. I was in Jerusalem last summer, and as I approached the consulate, I noticed that the largest banner over the building wasn't the U.S. flag. It was a pride banner. Our government, that was the message we were taking to the nations of the world. Well, I'm grateful that these ungodly biblical expenditures are being reviewed and exposed. The further we as a nation separate ourselves from a biblical worldview, the further we will separate ourselves from justice, liberty, and true freedom for all people. As Christ followers, I don't believe we can afford to stay silent. We're called to speak up for the truth. Now, I know sometimes that's uncomfortable. We don't have to be angry, we don't need to be belligerent, and we certainly don't need to be violent. But we've got to have the courage to tell the truth at our kitchen table, at our holiday table, and when we gather with our friends. If we will do that, I promise you there are more reasons for hope than despair. We'll be back in just a moment to read some of your emails. Thank you for taking the time to share your emails. Your thoughts and ideas are important to us. Nancy commented on YouTube, while we fight, we need to pray. What we're seeing and hearing about our government is just so upsetting to the point of sickening. God, please give President Trump and his people the strength, wisdom, and the power to remove this evil from our government and our country. Strengthen the hearts of your people to overcome the lies. Our world is shaking, and we need you more than ever. Nancy, I couldn't agree with you more completely. I don't believe the change in Washington will ever be maintained or sustained unless we take the time to pray. It's not just for when we're in church on the weekends. We've got to pray every day. That opens the door for the possibilities of God. Jerry M. emailed, I attend a Baptist church in Harlingen, Texas. Our pastor is definitely a Bible believer. My wish is to have the full Bible preached to apply to our daily lives. Explaining the words in Hebrew and Greek is good, but it's not as helpful and as encouraging as just loving and correcting words. I watch all of your TV programs, the more the better. Well, Jerry, I have learned I am grateful for every church that speaks the truth. For too long, we've had churches stepping away from the authority of Scripture, the redemptive work of Jesus, with a compromised message. If your pastor is giving you the truth biblically, give him a hug, tell him and thank you. Together, we're making progress. Kathy, watching on YouTube, made this comment, thank you, Pastor Jackson and Kirk Cameron, for a fantastic show, sharing the latest news and happenings in the lives of others. We are all looking forward to Kirk's latest endeavor to provide families with a healthy and wholesome television program, Adventures with Iggy. Kirk has done a masterful job of speaking to our culture and helping us to understand the truth. I'm looking forward to his new program for our families and young people as well. Again, I want to thank you for watching our program. If you happen to miss a live broadcast, you can go to YouTube. The shows are posted every evening. If you will subscribe and like it, that will help us a great deal. At the end of the day, the viewers that watch our program enable us to stay on the air. Make sure you send your emails and comments at allenjacksonnow.com. From all of us here in Nashville, Thank you for joining us tonight, and have a wonderful evening.